All right, let's start. So I want to deliver two things that I promised last time. I hope I will. Okay, so I need to find a title. And that will be Free Energies and Algorithm. Okay, so you remember what we discussed last time? I presented a problem of learning information from a perturbed matrix to try to see if we can recover the perturbation. It was called the spiked matrix problem. Okay, you can also do it for the spiked tensor problem. Then I showed you that this is nothing but the p-spin, our old good friend, the p-spin. And then I told you that we can compute the free energy with replica. Then we can analyze the phase diagram. We can understand what's going on. There is a first-order transition in the p-spin. There is a second-order transition for the Shaiton-Kirkpatrick problem. And then I made some funny plot, and I said, here it's easy to learn, here it's impossible, and all that. Okay? So, of course, this was based on two things. Well, on one thing, first of all, the ability to compute the free energy. Okay? I need to be able to compute the average free energy, and from the average free energy, I need to be able to compute the average overlap between the equilibrium configuration and the hidden assignment. Okay? What I call the magnetization. So that is something that the replica method is doing for you. So for those of you who try to do the exercise, I'll let you. So let's try to replica free energy. Okay, so for those of you who try to do the exercise, and I hope you did, and if you didn't, well, I think you should, because you've been here for you're being here for a month, and it would be a pity if you never do a replica computation. But that's kind of the topic of the school, and this is not a hard one. So if you do it, you will find that for the problem that we have been looking, so I remind you, the Hamiltonian was, all right, from memory. Okay, I think that was squared. There was maybe an n here. And okay, I think that was the Hamiltonian. Probably should get it right. All right. Yes, I got it right. Okay, that was the Hamiltonian that we had. So this is the disorder. This is the planted assignment, the hidden assignment that we want to find. Right? Remember, there is this vector x star that I want to find. I remind you that the model was that there is a hidden vector x star, and you're observing y equal to square root of lambda n x star transpose plus a random matrix W. Okay? And so this is x star, and these are the elements of the random matrix. Okay, that was the Hamiltonian. Now the equilibrium configuration of the statistical physics model described by this Hamiltonian, we expect them to correlate with the hidden truth if lambda is large enough, and to be basically random if lambda is too low. So lambda is what is called the SNR. Okay, so this is Hamiltonian. And the replica method is telling you that the average free energy, so divided by the number of variables, the number of spins if you want, is equal to the free energy of the denoising problem, which we wrote last time, except I use lambda m instead of lambda, plus lambda m2 divided by 4, and I should take the minimum over m of this expression. All right, so you might as well accept it. I'm giving it to you. This is what we find from replica. Or you can, and actually you should compute it. And you will see that you do some crazy stuff in the replica computation, but so far it's working, and it has been working very well for 30 years, so you should kind of believe it. Okay? Now, not only that, but the argmin of this free energy, so let me give a name to this. Let's call it FRS of m. It's a function. So not only the minimum of this function is the free energy, but the replica method is also telling you that the actual equilibrium m, what we actually call m last time, that is average overlap between your estimate and the truth, so I'm calling it m equilibrium, is indeed the argmin of this function. Okay, so where does this come from? Okay, so please do the exercise. But what I want to do today is to present to you another way to compute it. It's not really another way to compute it, because you can do this only if you know the truth. So if you believe this is the correct result, you know, not everyone is like in this room. We are not all believing in replica. I know that you all believe in replica, because you're not asking question, why is this true? Right? Every time Giulio was like, yeah, this is from the replica. Oh, okay, fine. So not everyone is like this. Okay? If I go to people in statistics and I tell them, there is this very hard problem, and I know what is the optimal overlap you can ever get. I will say, how do you do this? And I say, well, I'm using this great method, and I'm replicating Z, and then I send N to 0, and they say, whoa, 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 what are you doing? And then I start to explain, and they said to me, it's crazy. Okay? And they are right. Okay? Mathematicians are shocked about what you do in replica method, and you should be too. I mean, of course, if you have not done the exercise. But if you do it, you see that you are doing some crazy thing. Okay? So cavity is kind of more, I'm not saying it's more rigorous, because it's not, but at least you know what you are doing. Okay? And I think one of the great things that has been done in the field, at least from the theoretical side, has been the invention of cavity method that you will see with Federico, because at least the assumptions are clear. You're assuming something, and from that you get the result. Okay. And then the chain of reasoning is clear. Okay, so you will see with Federico to get that kind of result. Will you do dense system? Okay, so as an exercise, you can, after Federico's, you can get that kind of result from cavity. All right. Now, I want at least to spend the first half of the lecture to tell you that we are not just dreaming. This result is just not, you know, us who think that we are great at solving problem. You can actually solve this thing, and you can actually prove that they are correct rigorously. Okay? And there have been a lot of activity in mathematical physics. So of course, I don't want to go too much in this, but I think it's nice to see it once. Okay? And there is a big hammer here, a great tool that allows you to prove that kind of result. And it's due to a Roman, an Italian scientist called Francesco Guerra. 2R? 2R? Yes. Oh, so. Che brutta figura. All right, I hope he's not listening. All right, so Francesco Guerra, a Neapolitan, who invented this method called Guerra interpolation, who has triggered a large number of activities and of work in this field. For instance, The replica method has been entirely proven for the Sherrington-Kirkpatrick model, and this is due to Francesco Guerra and then to Michel Talagrand in France. So it turns out that for the problem we are interested in my lecture, it's actually easy to apply that kind of method. Well, it's easy because we are in a sample situation where, if you remember, we do not have any replica symmetry breaking in this estimation problem. You remember when we had this complicated phase diagram with Gardner phase, spin glass, and everything, but my magic line, my Nishimori line, was always either in the paramagnetic phase or in the ferromagnetic phase. So somehow everything is simpler. This is why also I'm telling you. Did I tell you you should do the exercise number 2? Okay, so that's also a good way to learn that kind of stuff because it's simpler even from the point of view of mathematics. Okay, so there have been a lot of activity recently to use these Guerra interpolation methods for that kind of learning problem. And I need to mention, because I know that they are watching, I need to mention so my collaborator in Switzerland, Nicolas Macris and Jean Barbier, who have been working really hard, and they have devised fantastic tools that allows to solve pretty much everything these days with that kind of method. But now we are going to do something simpler because I don't want to spend 1 hour on it. All right, so how does it work? So essentially everything is here, right? What we are trying to compute looks like the free energy of a problem which is really easy, which we computed, which is the problem of one variable or one spin, if you want, with one spin with some kind of interaction. I mean, it's one spin in a field, if you want, plus this thing which doesn't look so hard. Okay, and that's lambda m squared over 4. So the idea is the following. Since we don't know how to solve directly this method, this problem, and we know with replica, but we don't know how to do it without any dirty tricks, what we shall do is to first solve this problem. So one spin in a field. And then we are going to slowly transform the problem of one spin in a field into this problem. This is why it's called interpolation. Okay, so let me try to be a bit precise here. And I need to be clever with... all right, let me try to have a clever use of blackboards. All right, so let me write 2 Hamiltonian. There is the one we want to solve, which is the one of the spiked model. So I'm just rewriting what is written here. In fact, I will write minus the Hamiltonian. Will I? Well, no. Okay, so here I'm just rewriting what we have here. Xi star, xj star, lambda over n, xi omega ij j. Okay? 2. Thank you. Now let's write the other Hamiltonian. So imagine now, well, so you remember that we had this problem. So it was called the denoising, I believe. Okay, so we had minus lambda x squared over 2n. It looks very similar, actually. There was no n here. Plus xi, so x star, lambda, plus, okay, I think I use a z, but then someone told me that I'm using too many z's, because of course when you have the partition sum, so I will use xi for the noise. All right, that was our Hamiltonian for one spin. But I can decide to do it for n spin. They are still independent, so in this case, I can just sum over I. And this is what it gives. Square root of n. There is no square root of n here. It's square root of lambda. Sorry? Spiked model, right? Matrix factorization. So this is the one we want to solve. This is the one we know to solve. Denoising. All right. So now this is the idea. We are going to solve the two problems at the same time. So imagine now we have a more complicated. First, we are going to make the problem more complicated, and then it simplifies. All right? So imagine you still have your vector x star that you want to know. Okay? And you observe a matrix Y, which is x star square root lambda over n plus w. So that is our usual matrix problem. But we also observe a vector. So this is a matrix. Now assume you also observe the vector y, y tilde, which is x star square root of lambda plus the noise. And this is a denoising problem. Now I am observing both. So I'm trying to solve the true problem at the same time. Right? So the problem is the following. The side of the room is creating a vector x star. And then they are sending twice the information. Once in the form of a noisy version of x star. So x star plus some random noise. And they are also sending this vector, which is x star. Sorry, there is a transpose here. X star transpose plus a random matrix. So you are receiving both. Okay? Now in that case, the total Hamiltonian of the system, well, is just the sum of the two Hamiltonian. Okay, and you can write the base formula associated with this problem if you doubt it. It's as simple as this. Okay, so that looks totally stupid, and it is stupid because, of course, if I don't know how to solve the problem, if I don't know how to solve the statistical physics problem with this Hamiltonian, I don't know how to solve it with this Hamiltonian. All right, so now let's use a trick. And this is where the Guerra interpolation is coming in. So what Francesco Guerra is telling us is to say, fine, let's introduce a time. So this lambda up there, I replace it by lambda 1 minus t, where t is a time. Okay, I'm introducing a fictitious time. Same here. And same here. So what I have done is to say, fine, actually this problem has a time-dependent signal-to-noise ratio, if you want. Okay? Of course not. Now I'm going to do exactly the same here. I will multiply by a number m, which so far is just a number. Okay? M, and up at a time t. And now you will see why I'm doing this. So minus lambda m t, lambda m t, and square root of lambda m t. Okay? Now these things are indexed by time. All right, so don't think of the time as a real time, okay? It's just a parameter. Now, why is this interesting? Because now I have an interpolation parameter, which is this t, this time. At t equal to 0, everything here disappears. Okay, I have done exactly the opposite of what I wanted to do, of course. But you see, for those of you, okay, many of you have iPads, so you just erase it. And I have a blackboard, so it's okay. 1 minus t, 1 minus t, 1 minus t. All right, now, t, 1 minus t. All right, now, of course, at time...
The noise is the same for each spin, the noise side.
The noise is different for each spin. Right, and here I forgot a W. Right, but I wrote it as a vector, so. But it's a psi I, and each of them is a Gaussian random noise, yes. I need a psi I here. Thank you, fair enough. Okay? If the noise would be the same for all spin, I would have a coupled problem and I would not solve it. I don't think it will be hard, but it's... Okay, now I have what I wanted. Okay, at t equals 0, everything here disappears. And the problem is just given by the denoising problem, which I know to solve. Fair enough. At t equals 1, everything else disappears here. And at t equals 1, this problem is just the one I want to solve. Okay? So this is what is called Guerra interpolation. I will try to interpolate from the result at t equals 0, which I know, to prove the result at t equals 1. Okay, let's try to keep this guy up there. All right, how do you do this? Well, you write what is known with a very pedantic name, I believe, the fundamental theorem of calculus. Okay, so I'm just saying that the free energy that we want...
Sorry, a quick question.
Yes.
On the expression for y, on that board, why do you have an x star, the w acting on the x star?
On this one?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, so why do you have wx star?
Why do I have wx star? I think the x star was just there before, and and it got... when my equation got pushed, and yeah, there's no x star. I insist it's the same x star for both, though, all right? I'm sending the message. If you want, in communication theory, it will mean I'm sending the message through two channels. Okay? And then I'm interpolating from one channel to the other. By the way, this is a method which is used a lot also to prove a rigorous result in error correction. All right. So the free energy will be... Okay, the free energy at time t, time 1 if you want. I'm just saying that it will be equal to the free energy at time 0 minus, plus the integral from 0 to 1 times the derivative of the free energy. Okay, this is just what we do when we compute integral. Okay, I remind you what we call the free energy here is the expectation over the disorder of the log of z, of minus log z. All right, so let's try to use this. What is f of 0? The free energy at time 0, we know it. At time 0, as I told you, this is just the denoising problem. Except that I have lambda m instead of lambda. Well, that's convenient because that's exactly what I have here. All right, so that's good. Phi denoising lambda m. Right. Isn't that great? We get already half of the result. Okay, now let's see what is going on here. So here we have the derivative. We are going to push the derivative inside the expectation. Okay, if you want to be mathematically rigorous, you have to work a bit to check if you have the right to do this, but okay, I will not be too pedantic. So what you have is the expectation over W x star and psi, right? Remember that now there are two different noises of the derivative of log z minus derivative of log z. But z, if you remember, just the integral of minus h of t. Okay? If I derive z with respect to t, let's write log z equal this. If I derive the logarithm of z with respect to the time, what do I get? Well, the derivative of the log is equal to the derivative of this divided by that. Okay? Now, if I derive this with respect to time, essentially I will have just the derivative of the Hamiltonian here. Okay? So I will get we'll put a minus here. Okay, and what this is just the average over the Gibbs distribution. I mean, this is just the Gibbs distribution of the derivative with respect to time of the Hamiltonian. Okay, if it is, since it is with respect to time, I might as well use the dot as we do in physics. Okay, so this formula is not so hard. Okay, it's not so hard, but now we have to work because we have to compute this. Okay, but yes, Guillaume? Ah, yes, thank you. Thank you. And the disorder average over the disorder. Okay, every time I have an E, it's average over the noise and the hidden assignment. Okay, and every time I'm using this average, it's the Gibbs average. That's fine? I stopped working on the second line. Yes, I did. I will, yeah. That was the second line, the first line, okay? Okay, so basically we need to compute this, all right? So let me first tell you, we have no idea how to compute this exactly, because otherwise everything will be easy. But we're going to do something else. Okay, it's clear so far? All right, so let's compute this beast here. All right, the Hamiltonian is written here. Okay, so it's not so hard to write the derivative. Okay, so if you write the expectation of h prime, over disorder of the average over Gibbs of the derivative of the Hamiltonian time-dependent one. All right, I'm just writing the result. Okay, we still have our expectation here. This is what you have. Yeah. It's a long line, but I will write it anyway. Okay, so this is half of it. Okay, if you derive the first h up there, this is what you get, right? So you have a t, so of course you add that. Then it gets average and average. Second one is also time t, so you have that. And the third one, there is square root of t, so you have this term here. Okay? Then you need to do it for the denoising one. Not much surprise here. But wait, no, I'm writing something wrong. You see, I'm trying to copy what I wrote instead of just redoing it. So maybe I should just redo it. Okay, plus sum over I minus lambda m over 2 xi squared minus xi star m lambda minus xi ci minus plus square root of m lambda divided by 2 square root of 1 minus t. Okay? Yes, this one is bracket, and this one is bracket, and this one is bracket. Lambda is a number. It's not derived. There is no lambda dot. Lambda doesn't depend on time. It's multiplied by time. When I wrote lambda t, it was lambda times t. Okay, so it's an explicit. Okay? Okay, I can try to check the signs. They are bad. I think this one has always a different sign than these two. Are you sure? Yes, that looks about right.
Put a minus sign when you do the time derivative.
Yes, I think that the problem is that this is minus Hamiltonian. Okay? Why? Because what is written up there was exactly what I had in the exponential of the Gibbs measure. Okay, but the Gibbs is not exponential as Hamiltonian. It's exponential minus Hamiltonian. Okay, so I think that now it's correct. So are we done with the complicated computation? No, it has opposite sign with this one because there is a 1 minus t. So when I derive with 1 minus t, there is a minus that appears. Right? One up there is t, and below it's 1 minus t. So when you do when you take the derivative, all these signs here are opposed to this one. Yes.
So the Hamiltonian of the
It certainly is. Of course, now that I'm not a physicist and I'm a statistician, I'm working with the log of the posterior. I mean, what is it, this thing with physicists and this minus signs? Yes, you're right. Okay, and as you will see, the minus or plus sign will be extremely crucial for everything. So, of course, it's good that you are stopping me. All right. Plus, minus, minus. Minus, plus, plus. All right, so now we are almost done. There is one annoying part here. I mean, that is okay. I mean, that is a correlation between xi and xj. This is a correlation between xi and xi star and the correlation between xj and xj star. Now, this one is a bit annoying because there is explicitly the noise in it. And you have the sister of this term is here, where you have xi, xi. Right? Luckily, this noise is Gaussian. And there is a nice identity which is the following one. If you have the expectation over a Gaussian variable of z, f of z, it's equal to the expectation of the derivative of f of z. Okay, that looks like magic. It's actually just integration by part. Okay, so physicists call the integration by part. But in statistics, you have to give name to everything, so it's called the Stein lemma. Stein's lemma. So the first time I saw this, people say, no, by Stein lemma, we show that. I said, how do we do this? I mean, that looks super powerful. It must be a fantastic trick that requires years of mathematics. And then I realized it's just integration by part. Okay, so I was taking fun of my friend and saying, you statisticians are ridiculous. And they tell me, come on, I mean, you just took Bayes' theorem and transformed it into Nishimori relation. So, all right, so I guess we are even. There is a lambda m, lambda m, lambda m. M lambda. Lambda is multiplied by m for the denoising part, that's all.
Oh, it's multiplied. I thought it's
There is no sub. Okay, everything is explicit.
so this lambda times m. Oh, okay.
Yes, it's lambda m as a multiplication. Okay? So, what you have to do here is to use Stein lemma. I will let you do it, because otherwise we spend too much time. And then everything simplified to something. Yes?
Just maybe for clarification, so the WIG, you could put it out of the bracket, of the thermal bracket.
I could put it out of the thermal bracket, but it's important to remember that the bracket itself depends on WIJ, right?
Yeah, but what I mean is that the integration by parts, you will do it on the
Yes.
external
Okay.
aspect.
So what Guillaume is saying is that this can be written here. And this is the expectation over W. So this is like my Z, and this is my f of Z. Okay, and I have the same here. Okay, so the xi I can go out. Okay, it's true. But remember that the Gibbs average is the one with this Hamiltonian, so it depends on xi. So doing the derivative is, you have to be a bit careful. And giving you the result, which is very nice. Okay. Sorry, I will just write an. So it's minus lambda over n, sum of I smaller than j. Okay, I'm a bit sloppy with a equal to j, but this is not important. I mean, it's like in the p-spin. If you take self-interaction or not, it doesn't matter too much. xi, xj, xi star, xj star, plus lambda over 2n Okay, it simplifies a lot, actually. This is how it looks. Yeah, good moment to ask.
So if the Hamiltonian depends on psi and W,
I'm sorry?
if the Hamiltonian depends on
Yes.
psi and W, how would you take them out?
Well, they disappear because when you do this integration by part, this is what happens. You have to do it explicitly if you want, if you don't believe me, but this is what happens, right? I'm doing this integration by part. So this is like, if you want, I have expectation over a Gaussian variable of the Gaussian variable times something. So I'm applying this formula, and the W disappears. Then you have to do the computation, and it gives you this. Okay, you have to do it. It's not so hard, but it's a few lines. Yes, Marilou?
The last line is still has an expectation.
Yes, of course. Minus, yes. It's minus xi average squared m lambda over 2. Sorry. Okay, I'm a bit confused because, of course, all my notes are with notation that I use in the stat paper, which is a small n, and of course, in physics, this is an intensive parameter, so extensive. Yes, I lose the time dependence. However, remember that the time dependence is hidden there, right? All my Gibbs expectation is time dependent, but yes, the t is magically vanishing. Right? Why is it happening? When you take the derivative here, there is a square root of t that comes out and cancels this guy, and that will be the same here. Okay, you have to do this computation. But it's not hard, but it's a bit tedious. You should not be surprised that when I derive log of z, I have something that looks like correlations. It's what we do all the time. Okay, so what do I do with this? What do I do with this? Why do I do with that? I will go here. And now we put everything together. Okay, and what I really want to know is what is the expectation of log of z at time 1. Okay, so we already said it's phi then lambda m. Now I want to divide this by n, okay, by the number of spin. By the way, of course, here I made a mistake. If I don't divide by n, there's n here, obviously. Right? Remember that free energy phi denoising was one for one spin. Now I have n spins, so of course with a factor n. Okay, so now I'm trying to compute the free energy divided by number of variables. So you notice that I alternate between the name variable and spins. It's because I'm slightly schizophrenic when I am a physicist and when I am something else. But it's good. We managed to convince the mathematicians to use the word thermodynamic limit instead of n going to infinity. So we are really happy. Of course, yeah. It's a nicer name, right? There's a nice ring to it. Okay. So now what you need to do is to realize that these sums can all be written in terms of scalar product between x and x stars. Okay, so you try to arrange everything. And this is what you have. Lambda over 4 expectation of x, so the scalar product divided by n minus m squared minus lambda 2, so this is still time dependent, and we are done with the computation. X star divided by n minus m squared okay, again, it's easy to go from here to here. You just have to to do it. And this is how it looks. I forgot an expectation somewhere. Here. Expectation. expectation. All right. And now I'm stuck. So first I let you digest this. I see that you guys cannot read it at all. Okay. If I put it higher, is it better? Okay. I'm sorry? The last two terms. No. Oh, yes, I can, but I won't. It's really important that I keep them like this. But yes, of course, they are very similar. Here I have a x, and here it's x star. Okay? So okay. Raise your hand if you want me to rewrite it big. All right, so democracy being the oppression of the majority by the minority. All right, that was a fake vote, so I will still keep it this way. No, I mean, I think it's cute. I mean, this computation, so. All right, I will rewrite it here. Is this fine? So it's phi denoising lambda m plus, and then we have this annoying term which is integrated between 0 and 1. We have the first term which is expectation over disorder of. All right, so now I need it's lambda divided by 4 times expectation over disorder of x of the scalar product minus m squared minus lambda over 2 expectation of basically the same thing, except now we have x star here. Okay, and now I have minus lambda m square over 2 plus lambda m square over 4. And I know I could simplify those two. No, it's minus over 4 plus lambda m square 2, okay, over 2. It's fine? All right, so now another thing which is very interesting when you speak to statisticians and when you speak to physicists. Physicists write equalities, okay? For some reason, if you go to probabilists or statisticians, they are freaked out by equality. Instead of writing that A is equal to B, they are really comfortable with writing that A is smaller or equal to B, and at the same time it's larger or equal to B. And then they are happy. Okay? It's a weird way of thinking, but it's everything is written in terms of inequalities. So let's try to see if we can write inequalities. Well, you see that we are not so far from inequalities, because now if I take this guy and I simplify it, this is just plus lambda m squared over 4. Okay, so all the thing that I write here is exactly what we want, this FRS of m. Then we have this unfortunate factor which is still here. So it's equal to exactly what we want plus this. Okay, so I'm stuck. So I cannot do anything, and okay. Of course, if this thing will be positive always, or let's say non-negative, or non-positive, then that will be great, because I will have a bound, right? If I will show you the free energy is equal to the one to this one plus something positive, then at least I will know that the free energy is smaller than the replica one. But this is a positive term. There is a square here. This is a positive term, but yeah, I mean, what can I do? Okay, what should I do? Aha! Vous êtes Nishimori? indeed, you remember that this is an estimation problem. That means that any function in which I have yes, wait, there is a problem here in the way it's written, so I need to... Yes, sorry, I lied to you at some point. At this computation here, there is a subtlety. These are not the same x. There are two replicated versions of the system, so x1, x2. Okay? And it's the same here. Right? Well, x is my variable that I'm integrating over, right? But what happens when you do the integration by part is that at some point you have a second copy that appears. All right? So you have x1 and x2 are two vectors which are distributed with the same probability measure, the same Hamiltonian. So if you want, these are two copies of the system. Okay? This is what happens when you do the derivative. Okay. So now, let me see if I... Yeah. Well. Yes?
There should also be x1 and x2 over there, or no?
There is what?
Here?
Here?
No, on the blackboard that you just...
So, the point is, here you see that you have xi, xj average squared. Okay? So whenever you see something like this, where does it come from? It's a legitimate... Okay, fine. If you see something like this, this is average of x squared for one Hamiltonian. So you just sample x, you put it squared, you do that many times, you take the average. If you have something like this instead, okay, you can think of it as, okay, I'm computing the average of x, and then I square it. True. But you might as well think that, well, I have two copies of the system, and I average them. This is exactly the same. Okay? So why do I get this thing? It's because when I have this average squared, it's really like having two copies of the system. Okay, I see a lot of faces which are not happy here. So. That is true. So not only you should do the exercise number 2, which is replica computation, but also the 1.3 exercise, in which this trick appears in a much simpler way when you are proving, I think, the IMMSE theorem. Okay, but this is nothing more than this. Okay, the average of x squared is the average of two independent copies of x. All right.
So this is a really stupid question, but why you refuse to cancel the last two terms?
I did, to put it here.
But so why you didn't?
Because I will do something else later. Okay, and I don't want to erase it. But I agree. Okay, so Francesco is complaining that this is equal. Okay, this is true.
No, because then
And I put it here, and this is the replicated free energy plus this. All right. Now, let's look at this term. And now it's obvious that I should use Nishimori. Because Nishimori is telling me that whenever I have a function of two independent copies, I can replace it one copy with x and the other one by x star. Okay? And that means that this thing here is the same as this thing here. Except I have a lambda over 4 and a lambda over 2. Right? So by Nishimori, all this is FRS of n. Okay, so let's try to not be wrong. So, okay, I think this is the correct one. Minus dt lambda over 4 expectation of, well, the one you want. They are both equal. All right, let's see if I got the sign right. -1/2 plus 1/4. That sounds about right. Okay, so let's see if it is correct now. So now you see that the truth is equal to the replica minus something. Okay? So that means that the truth has to be smaller to the replica one. Or equal. Who knows? Maybe this is 0. Right? I would really like this to be 0 because I call this thing m, and if this will be exactly equal to x star divided by n, that will be really what I want m to be. So that will be great, but I don't know this yet. I introduced m just as a number. You remember here it doesn't mean anything. It's just a number. Okay? But still, I get the result that the free energy is smaller or equal than f_rs of m for all m. Okay. For all m positive or 0. Because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So you get a bound. We know that at least the free energy is smaller than the replicated one. I mean, if it is true for all m, it's certainly smaller than the minimum. Okay, so what I mean is that we have this function f_rs of m, okay, or looks like a potential, whatever. The true free energy must be lower than this point. Of course, I would like to show that it is exactly this point, but okay, we are not there yet. Okay? So by the way, this computation is taken from a paper I wrote last year with Lenka and a guy called Chu. And it's interesting because his name is jamming. So every time you guys speak about the jamming transition, I think about my friend, and I'm very confused. All right, so this is a jamming computation, if you want. And then we try to find the other bound. We try to show that f is also larger or equal than f_rs of m minimum. And we managed to do it with our friend in Switzerland. And it took us 40 pages. OK, so let's start. No. Okay. All right, so after this, interestingly, we had some friends at École Normale, Marc Lelarge and Léo Miolan, who found a shorter proof in 3-4 pages. That was very nice. They also generalized our proof to any rank, to non-symmetric matrices. So basically, we can prove everything. And now we have a paper with them when we did tensors. But then my friend in Switzerland were not happy that they found a better proof. So they found yet another proof. So now there is a fantastic method called the stochastic interpolation by Jean Barbier and Nicolas Macris, with really a powerful method that allows to show this thing very short. But then I went in Berkeley last month, and then Ahmed El-Alawi showed me an even simpler proof for this problem. I'm going to show it to you. It's kind of a cute way to get the other bound. So this is how it works. Yes?
So this yields the same answer as a replica method, but
not yet. I have a bound. Okay, let me show the other bound, and then we can discuss. Okay, how do I get the other bound? Sorry. So ideally, what I would like to show is something similar to this with a different sign here, and then I will be done. Okay? Okay, I don't know how to do this. It's not easy. So I will do it this way. First of all, I will change the problem. Okay? I will not change Hamiltonian, and I do it by replacing the m which is here by a q, and the m which is here by a q. Now I have something that depends on 2 parameters. Now, of course, you might complain that now what is this Hamiltonian? it's not an Hamiltonian. I mean, if this is not the same number here and here, it's not a denoising Hamiltonian. It's just a made-up Hamiltonian that doesn't describe anything interesting, maybe. Okay? But I can still look at this problem. All right? I mean, I'm a theoretical physicist. I have the right to look to any problem I want. Okay, so if you do this, first of all, you lose the Nishimori relation. I mean, this is not an estimation problem. This is just, well, a random problem like this. Okay? You lose the Nishimori relation, but what happens is that you get a Q here. So you have to redo the whole computation. And, all right, so now I need to, oh, no, it's easy. And you get a Q here. Okay? Sorry. Let's erase this line because otherwise it's confusing. So you get a Q there, a Q here, and now you will see why I kept these two terms, because one of the two is becoming a Q, probably the one divided by 4. Yes. Okay, this is what I get now. So now I'm looking to a problem which maybe is not very interesting. I mean, it's not interesting, but at t equal 1, this is still the problem I want, okay? So, but it's not an estimation problem. But I can still look at this. Now, I look at this, and there is still nothing I can do. I mean, it doesn't look like I can find a sign somewhere, okay? So I have to add another trick. I will now not look at the free energy, but I will restrict my free energy to be at fixed value of the overlap with the planted assignment. Okay? So that means that whenever I'm summing over all x, okay, where is, right? So now I'm defining f of m as, okay, so there is the expectation of the log of z of m. And z of m, what is it? It's the same as before, except now when I sum over all configuration, I keep only configuration such that x star divided by m is equal to m, large M. So don't confuse the small m that I introduced so far, which is just a number, and there's m, which is a magnetization. Right? And now the physicist in you should complain that I use a large m, while this is a variable divided by number of spin, but I do what the hell I want. Okay. And if I wrote a small m, you will complain that it's the same as the other one, so it's confusing. Okay, so I'm just summing over a part of the configuration that ensure that I'm looking to the free energy at fixed magnetization. All right, so what happens? So what happens is the following. Let's compute f of m at t equal 1. So that will be the denoising problem at fixed magnetization. But now there is a sample identity. Since I'm summing, sorry, this is z of m. Since this is sum over not all configuration, and what I'm summing is something positive, in particular, this is smaller than z. Okay? Z is the sum over all configuration of something positive. Z of m is the sum over some configuration, so it's smaller. If I take the log, it's still smaller. And if I take minus log, it's larger. Okay? So the denoising problem at fixed magnetization is equal to the one where I don't fix anything plus a positive constant. Okay? Well, probably strictly positive, but Okay? Well, smaller or equal, because here I divide by n, so maybe it's a constant which is not too big and goes to 0 when n is going to infinity. Okay? Now, what about these guys? Well, I don't know about this one, but you see, here this guy will be constrained. This is m, after all. Okay? Now, imagine if I fixed not any magnetization, but m large equal to m small. So I'm looking at the free energy when the magnetization is restricted to be equal to this m I used here. Okay? So F of big M equals small m. Well, the nice thing is that I'm killing off that guy. Okay, so it's this plus, now we have this guy, which is also positive. So another term which is positive, minus lambda q square over 4 plus lambda m square over 2. Okay? So this guy is killed. That is positive. And now we have a nice result. Yes.
You get exactly the same expression, but only with x star equal to m.
Yes, more or less. You need to work it a bit.
Yeah, okay, but there is no other term.
No. Well, no, because this guy is also modified. Okay? But it's modified by something which is positive.
Okay.
So I don't care.
Okay, that's what
Okay, and now what do I got? It's f of m, so the magnetization when the free energy, when the magnetization is restricted to be equal to m, is equal to almost what we had before. So let's do it. F of m equal n. Sorry, this is divided by n. Okay, is now equal to, okay, so let's call this CRS of MQ. Right, so CRS of MQ is this guy, this plus this. Okay, so it's phi then lambda Q lambda M minus lambda Q squared over 2 plus lambda over 4, sorry, plus lambda M squared over 2. Okay? And this is true again for all Q. Because Q was just a parameter here, and I still have, sorry, it's larger. All right, it looks like I'm not done yet, but I am. All right, because if this is true for all Q, this is true in particular when Q is equal to M. Okay? So, still true. Okay, no, I can finish here. All right, so it's still true for Q is equal to M, so it's still true for FRS of M. So I'm not done yet, because here I have a bound for the free energy without any restriction, and here I have a bound for the free energy restricted to a given magnetization. All right, but now, if I know the free energy for each magnetization, what is the true free energy? The lowest one. Okay? So, now let's write, what this means is the following. If you write the true free energy at fixed magnetization, okay, it's larger. So let's say that FRS is, okay, this is FRS of M. So we know that the truth is larger. But can it be this way? Can it be larger everywhere? No, because we know that the free energy, which is the minimum of this curve of the truth, is smaller than f of m, or equal. So that means that the only possibility is that they must coincide at the minimum. Okay? In fact, what this means is that it might coincide everywhere, but I don't prove that. Okay? They don't coincide everywhere, actually, because the true free energy has some replica symmetry breaking somewhere. So, I mean, they coincide most of the place. Okay? But, all right? And now you have proven that the minimum of the f of m going from replica is equal to the truth. So it's a very statistical, probabilistic way to derive things. First, a higher bound and a lower bound, and you prove that x is smaller or equal to, that a is larger or equal to b, then that a is smaller or equal to b, and so that means they need to be equal. Okay? So this is nice. I skipped a few details if you want to make it less fully rigorous, but not too much, as a matter of fact. I mean, this is pretty much how it works. And the nice thing is that not only we have proven that this is true, but we have also proven that this m is a true m. Right? In fact, if you want, you can... what you are doing here is a kind of Laplace method where we integrate over all the fixed magnetization, and we have to be dominated by the minimum one, and then m has to be given by the argmin. Okay? So we also prove the value of magnetization. So it's not so much work, as you can see. In fact, if you try to do the replica computation, it's more work. However, I'm claiming that there is no way anyone would have invented this method if you would not know the result in advance. Right? I mean, I did this starting from a single spin because I knew from the replica method, which I believed strongly, that the result was the free energy of a single spin plus something simple. Okay? So there is a large activity in mathematical physics these days around that kind of methods. Of course, if you want to apply it to more complicated problems, it gets more involved. If you have to treat replica symmetry breaking, it's more involved and everything, but the basic idea is the same. Okay? And it's all about interpolating at time zero between a known problem, which is always the problem which is factorized, so independent spin, independent variables, to the one that you really want to solve. Fine. I will stop here for this. I just wanted to show you this. I think it's cool that we know to prove this result. We know how to prove them in a large variety of situations. There has been a lot of work for this denoising problem. Now we know how to prove also the replica in cavity result for the LDPC codes that Gian mentioned. And we know how to use that method to prove the replica in cavity prediction for the stochastic block modeling that Chris mentioned, at least for these assortative groups. And there have been a lot of activity in that direction. It's a cool thing. Yes?
How about off the Nishimori line?
On the Nishimori line, it's much harder. Okay? So the problem is when you look at this, so off the Nishimori line, you have to work with this. Okay? So the nice thing is that this second method is working out of the Nishimori line. Okay? So out of the Nishimori line, with the second method, I can get something that the free energy is well, I get so this part is still true out of the Nishimori line. Okay? So if you want, this part, you still get it out of the Nishimori line. Right? Out of the Nishimori line, to get the two bounds, it's much harder. And this is why it required a lot of work from really great mathematicians. And they are still working in this direction. Okay? Now, the nice thing about these error corrections and the estimation problem is that you have the Nishimori relation that help you a lot. And so this is why it's much simpler. Okay, out of the Nishimori line, that's actually sometimes this is not tight. It's not an equality because sometimes you have to break replica symmetry breaking. So you should not expect this to always work. All right, it's a good moment to ask questions because I spent half an hour more than I expected to. I don't know what to start again. All right, so I was super clear. It's good. So that was part of what I wanted to tell you, right? So now, oh yes, and by the way, it's a tradition among speakers to ask this question. What is this f of m? Yes, but I think I heard it. It's like the... Yes, loud.
The Franz-Parisi potential.
No, you don't count, Patrick. So it's like... Don't be shy. Yes, it's like the Franz-Parisi potential. Okay? It's the free energy with fixed magnetization, but magnetization is the overlap with the truth here. But remember that M is equal to Q. So if you try to ask what is the overlap with the truth, it's the same question as asking what is the overlap with an independent equilibrium copy. Okay? So I might as well have written f of Q, at least on the Nishimori line. So this is really Franz-Parisi potential is exactly the same. In fact, the nice thing about this problem is that f of m, so the free energy with fixed overlap with the truth, is the same as the free energy with fixed overlap with a given equilibrium configuration, and this is the Franz-Parisi potential. Okay, so if you plug it here, if you plug it for the denoising, the version where you have binary spins, what you get here is the Franz-Parisi potential for the Chaitin-Kirkpatrick problem. Okay, you can repeat this for tensors. Just giving you the result. For tensors, it's entirely different. So if you have a tensor, you have a P here. You have a P minus 1 here. Okay. So if you have a P-spin model, so if you want a P-order interaction tensor, what you get is, I wrote it somewhere. All right, we need to find the good P such that I have 1/4 in the good case. So that looks good, but it's not this. I think it's 2P, yeah. This is how it, I think this is the correct result. With P equal 2 is certainly work, and I think this is good. Okay, so it's not very different for tensors. If you try to look at the spiked tensor model, the one that corresponds to the P-spin, you might ask, does the proof go through? And the answer is yes, it does when P is even. Why? Because everything is the same, except you have some P here. Okay? Of course, if P is odd, I cannot use this trick, and I have to work harder. Okay? In that case, you have to use different methods. But it still works for the 4-spin model, the 6-spin model, and the 8-spin model. Okay? And there are other methods that give it to you for the odd case. All right, so if you take this expression, with P is equal to 3, okay, even though it's not rigorous, you plug it the Ising version for the denoiser, that gives you a f of m, which will be the free energy of the Nishimori line on the P-spin model. You replace m by q, and voila! You have exactly the Franz-Parisi potential, at least when the temperature is larger than the Kautzmann temperature. Okay, so it's a cute way to compute it. And so this is why you actually should do the computation, which is in lecture 2 exercise. All right, so I wanted to discuss algorithm, but I won't. I will do that next time, and I will move to more interesting problems. But since I have 10 minutes, let me tell you random remarks about the connection between what I talk about again Tuesday, which is the connection between these problems and the original one, I mean the random p-spin. Okay? So, if you remember, so let's move to the p-spin. So you remember what I told you is that if you look at a problem, like a random p-spin problem, spherical, like the one Laetitia mentioned, Ising, doesn't matter, it's very similar. And you add a non-zero mean to the coupling, and you look at this diagram. You have this line here, where 1 over t is equal to j0, which is a Nishimori line. Okay? That was the same as this lambda star equal lambda. So you remember this? Right? So this is the problem we have solved. We have the free energy along this line. So we had the TD. So now let's look at the real random problem. The real random, totally random problem, the usual p-spin is G0 is equal to 0, right? So it's along this line. You remember that you have the dynamical transition, which people call also the MCT transition, because it corresponds to the one you have in mode coupling. You have a Scoutman transition, which I don't remember how. So Chris called that the condensation transition. You can also call it the spin glass transition if you want. Okay, so here you have this dynamical phenomena, and here you have this transition. Okay, and if you are looking to the Ising problem, at low temperature you have this Gardner transition. So if you want, this is paramagnetic, this is 1 RSB, and this is full RSB. And I think Francesco will discuss this further later. Okay, so let's look at our problem. So, in fact, the line is not totally vertical here, but it doesn't matter. So if you go further on the right, at some point the disorder do not matter, and you just have something which is a first-order transition between something which is magnetized with a positive magnetization, so ferromagnet. Here you have a first-order transition, and this thing here is just a spinodal. So this is a T first order, and this is the spinodal. Okay? And I told you that there is this mixed phase here, which is both spin glass and magnetized. All right, so let's see. Okay. Yes.
So in the previous computation, you did the energy at any temperature, or is it strictly above T10?
Okay, so So let me see. No, you can see my drawing. Okay. The free energy I got is at all temperature on the Nishimori line, on this line. Okay. Now, one thing which is cool is the following fact. Okay. For all temperature larger than Tk, you are in the paramagnetic phase. In the paramagnetic phase on the Nishimori line, the problem is not distinguishable from the problem with J equals 0. That's a very strong result. Okay? In the paramagnet, you remember that there is no way I can find information about the hidden assignment. In that case, the hidden assignment is just a positive spin. Okay, so that means that the problem that you are solving is, for all practical purposes, the same, right, on this line, as long as t is larger than tk. The problem you are solving here is the same as the one you solve here. All right. So what? Because you know to solve this problem as well. That is true, but you have one more thing in the planted problem, in the hidden assignment problem that I was looking. Is that if you have created yourself the system, you know what is a planted assignment. Okay? In fact, if you remember what I did when I mapped the problem to a J0, what I did is to transform the hidden assignment to the configuration of all spin align is equal to 1. So that means that on this line, you know at least one equilibrium configuration, which is all spin equal to plus. Okay, it's not entirely equilibrium with respect to magnetization, but with respect to everything else, it's fine. In particular, if you look to the energy of the all plus configuration here, it's exactly the same as the equilibrium energy of an equilibrium configuration here. Now, why is this cool? And why is it cool to have an equilibrium configuration? Because if you want to do a Monte Carlo simulation, you don't have to look for equilibrium, you've got one. So this is something which is actually really useful in practice, and you can do a lot of cool things. For instance, imagine you want to look to the following problem. You want to know what is the dynamic starting from equilibrium configuration, and you want to look to how much and how fast things decorrelate from equilibrium, which is something that we have been looking a lot, right? So first, let's be on the Nishimori line. So here, I know how to look, for instance, how the magnetization is decaying. Okay, I can start with all plus spin, and I can look, for instance, in this place. So here, 1. I can look at how the magnetization is decaying over time. It's a very simple simulation. I mean, I'm just creating the problem randomly. I initialize all spin plus, then I run a Monte Carlo, and okay, so let's start here first. It will look like this. If you do it here, what happens? Well, the magnetization will decay, but you see this is a spinodal, so that means that if you will be below this temperature, you should be trapped in the magnetized state, right? It has a good minima. So, okay, 1, 2, 3. So if you do it at 3, you should see this. In fact, you do. You can do the simulation. It takes 5 minutes. So if you are here and you get closer to this line, what you see is that you think that you are prisoner in the metastable state, and you go out. So you see this. It's very easy to do simulation like this. Okay? Now, what I told you is that because of the Nishimori relation, this all plus, which is like my hidden assignment, is like an equilibrium configuration. So this is the same plot you will get if you will be starting from an equilibrium configuration and doing the same simulation. You would have exactly the same curve. For the correlation, starting from an equilibrated configuration. However, it's easy to get an equilibrium configuration here. Here it's harder, it will take you hours. And here it will take you days or more, because if you think about it, this is below the spinodal, so it's really hard. Okay? So this is a cute way to get equilibration starting from equilibrium on the Nishimori line. And you might say, well, who cares about the Nishimori line? And you will be right. However, we know that everything you do in this model is the same you do here. So by doing this simulation, okay, what you're actually looking at is the equilibrium dynamics for the normal P-spin model. And you can simulate it this way. So this is a cute trick. All right? For all temperature larger than the Gaussman one, so if you want in the supercooled liquid phase, you have an equilibrium configuration for free with this trick, and that allows you to make very nice simulation with one configuration directly sampled. Okay, so it's been used by many people. The first time it has been used, I think it was by Guillaume, when he used this trick to make high precision simulation of the dynamics and the way things diverge at the dynamical transition for P-spins. And then I used it myself, and it's really nice. Okay? So that's one cool thing. Another thing which is cool, and I just want to mention it briefly because I'm running out of time. So by the way, I'm saying this for magnetization, but for instance, there is this chi-4, which is a variance of the correlation. You want to simulate the chi-4? Very easy. Look at the variance of M, and you can see the chi-4. It's the same, right? This 4-point susceptibility transformed into a 2-point susceptibility. There is always a dictionary. So there is always a dictionary between the melting of the equilibrium of the magnetized phase on the Nishimori line and the equilibrium configuration here. It's a cute thing to know. A second thing you can do is asking the following question. What if I do a quench starting from an equilibrated configuration? So what you will do is to say, fine, I'm starting from a configuration, then you do a low temperature quench, you do your simulation at 0 temperature, for instance, or low temperature. So that you can do starting from a random configuration, but how do you do that starting from an equilibrium configuration? Well, again, if you want to do simulation, it takes time. You have to equilibrate things. And if you want to do it between TD and TK, it's basically impossible. Not anymore, because this was trick. You know how to initialize your simulation. You just work on the Nishimori line, you start with +++, and you see what happens. Now, there is something super cute which is happening, which is the following. Okay, so if you look at the energy with respect to temperature in the p-spin model, it looks like this. Or let's say this is TD. This is the Kautzmann transition. Okay, this is how it looks. This is the energy as respect of T. Now what you can do is the following. You initialize your simulation with a trick in an equilibrated configuration. For instance, here. And now you do a very low Monte Carlo simulation, very small, very slow. Try to equilibrate as much as you want, and you lower the temperature. Now, of course, you think that you will follow the blue line. But you don't. Remember that you have this complicated rugged energy landscape that looks like this. And being at equilibrium at this energy means that maybe you are here. But if you wanted to be at equilibrium at a lower energy, you will need to be here. So of course, if you have infinite time, you will follow the blue line. But if you do Monte Carlo simulation, you don't have infinite time. And what you will do is basically, when you lower the temperature, visit this basin. Okay? So this is interesting because it can tell you, okay, imagine I equilibrate well, and then I lower the temperature. What happens? I'm trapped somewhere. So you can do this by simulation. You can do this by the Parisi-Franz potential of 2 temperature. It's called the following state method. It's something that was used, I believe, by Silvio Franz, Alain Barra, and Giorgio Parisi, and then with Lenka we studied it a lot. And you see very nice stuff. When you cool it down, this is what you have. You're always trapped into some portion of the system. When you warm it up, you have something like this. That's actually very surprising if you think about it. I mean, when you warm it, you think that larger than TD, you will come back on equilibrium. You don't, and you have that kind of curves. So that kind of method allows you to have a very good description of the landscape, in the sense that then you can explore the shape of each valley, like this. And if you think about it, this is telling you that this valley, in which you have equilibrium configuration, they are like volcanoes, right? If you go up in energy, that's not enough to go a bit up in energy. You need to be really, really, really high to be able to go out of the valley and come back to equilibrium. So, and I will finish with this. That means that this drawing is completely wrong, okay? What happened is that you have your big valley, which is paramagnetic. Then you have your deep valley below that correspond to equilibrium below TD. But this deep valley, when you go up, they go up very, very high. So it's kind of a volcano description. If you want, looks more like this, right? You are dominated by this. At low temperature, you are trapped here. And if you are trapped here, when you warm the system, you have to go very, very, very high before being able to come back into the parametric. Right, I will stop here, but there is a lot of things you can do by that kind of construction. And I think Francesco will come back to this. And yeah.
Just a little comment. We are going to see this kind of graph. I think Mark adding a lectures. For the moment, it just discuss what happens when you cool, but I think he's going to discuss what happens when you prepare very stable glass and you reheat them.
Picture 3.
Yes.
And I think so. Yes, maybe today or tomorrow you are going to see very similar.
And in fact, I'm saying temperature and energy, but it could be packing fraction and volume. And it will be saying that if you prepare things very well, then you try to do a jamming, you go to lower fraction, and so on and so forth. But now I'm really going into glasses, and I should not. So I think it's better to stop. And so thank you for your attention.